is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
Crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
Hi, Dave. You're live on the air with the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We love having you on the show. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Well, Merry Christmas to you guys, too, and to your listening audience.
Dave, let me give you. I've been struggling here. I've been scrambling to get an intro for you, man, and I can't find it. So I'm going to wing something here. Dave Hodges is a friend of this show. He is the proprietor of the very successful Dave Hodges Common Sense Show. And as we were saying before you came on, Dave, some of the reports and stuff that you've been putting out are danger level. But Dave does a great job, is published widely all over the internet, and has a huge listener base, and puts out great work. And as a friend of the show and been here before, so I know it's kind of a convoluted introduction, Dave, but thanks so much for joining us this afternoon on the Liberty Brothers.
Dave, your research is in research, isn't it? I mean, you actually teach at a college, and then you also do a lot of investigative journalism. And don't you have a degree in there? And you were at one point a college basketball coach.
Yeah, I was a college basketball coach. I've taught undergraduate, graduate psychology and research classes, sociology, history, kind of all over the map. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up.
Well,
I used to be a mental health counselor too.
Well, I can tell you that the research part of it, you can definitely tell with your articles, because they're always so well referenced, and you can tell that you've done your research. So.
Well, I think that's what separates us from Fox. And,
yeah.
And Wolf Blitzer at the Communist News Network. We do our homework.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you that. I don't know if you saw the story today, but there was those Fox News anchors when Snowden first released things that they were talking about killing him. Well, there's a guy that they're going after who retweeted what that Fox News anchor had said on the air, and now the FBI is coming after him, trying to say that he is threatening federal agents, when it's so clear he was just quoting exactly verbatim what those Fox News pundits were saying.
Well, the one thing that, and I'm going to tell people, right, I hope you're listening and write this down. When the feds knock on your door, you tell them Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. And that adds up to the 15th Amendment, which means you don't talk to these guys. Martha Stewart went to prison because they twisted her words and said she lied to federal agents. Not that she did anything wrong, but they twisted her words and turned her into a liar from their point of view. And that's why you don't give them any ammunition. You don't talk to them without a lawyer. Ever, never, ever.
Yeah, and the crazy part is they're allowed to lie to you. Like, that's just part of the game.
Well, our world's turned upside down. I got to tell you guys this. The other night, I was helping my son study for his final in his 8th grade social studies class, and part of the lesson was the Bill of Rights. So we were going through and processing it all, and he looked at me and says, "Dad, we're not following any of our rules." He's 14 years old, guys, and he's already figured it out.
Well, that's great. That's great news. And, there's a couple stories that is great news, Dave. There's a couple stories that you've published here, man, that really, perked up my antenna. And we've discussed the first one here. I think we've discussed this privately. This Operation Bluebeam. And we've talked, and you said, Dave, you're aware of the technology where they can put God's voice inside your head now. What do you think the potential ramifications are of the old the God and the voice inside the head machine, along with the Bluebeam machine? I mean, that could be quite a day, huh? I mean, to say the least.
Well, yeah, it could be, but there's so much support for the existence of this technology. Let's isolate some of these variables here, and let's talk about the voices within the head. Nick Begich, who I think is a tremendous researcher in his own right, the one who really exposed Project HAARP in a big way, he demonstrated in 1997 before the European Parliament how it was possible to transmit voices inside someone's head. So Nick has really exposed that. It's done on electromagnetic frequency level. And, of course, you can do it from space. You can do a broad spectrum beam, and you can have lots of people hear it. Or you can pinpoint individuals and target them. And I don't have any in fact, I had someone actually write to my website the other day and said that he's been targeted for 7 years, and this technology I'm talking about is not new. I agree with him. The technology is not terribly new, but the application on a widespread basis is new. And he said he'd been targeted for 7 years. I believe him. I just don't know how we get our hands on the fact that they're doing it. I know they can do it. Nick Begich has published the patents. I understand the science. But, boy, guys, I'll tell you, Operation Bluebeam, let's talk about what that is in its entire scope. What it's supposed to do is simulate an alien invasion. But they can do this any way they want, but this is the way it was originally set up. And it's kind of the fail-safe position of the globalists. If they can't get us under control doing one thing, this, I understand from what I've been told, is their final position. And they'll fake an alien invasion. They'll blow up a few things. They'll make us see things that aren't there, extraterrestrial in origin, supposedly. And it'll make us all acquiesce to become one humanity under the New World Order. What's interesting about Bluebeam is it is not new. My dad, when he was working in what was then called Operation Paperclip in the final days with some of these German scientists, they talked about this technology. He didn't work on operationalizing it, but some of the German scientists he was working with, and they were working on vertical takeoff craft, they told him about this technology. They said they had this technology. And this technology is not new. Let's go back to 1961, and there's a guy named Jose Delgado. Now, I did not put this in the article, and I may do a follow-up on this. Jose Delgado was a Spanish physiologist in Barcelona, Spain. He's famous for a bullfight he did when he stepped into the ring, and he had implanted an electrode into the limbic system, or the emotional center of the bull's brain. His job was to fight the bull. Only he had no intention of having the cape out and dodging the bull. So the bull comes charging at him. Delgado pushes this device, and it emits a signal, and the bull comes to a screeching halt and calmly walks away. Well, this caught the attention of Yale University, so they brought him over as a guest lecturer, and he stayed there from 1963 to 1968. And he was well published. And then he went to work for Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto, California. And we all know now that SRI, as it's called, was a front for CIA. And it was tied to MK Ultra. And this is where Delgado really got into mind control. And interestingly, guys, we don't know a lot of what he did, but I saw an interview with him in 2005. After he retired, so this is 37 years he worked with the agency. He said, we're doing things that we should never have done. We're controlling people's minds on a level that no one would believe. But he didn't elaborate, probably because of his national security oath. So that's just a little bit of brief history of the technology behind this. HAARP can be used to distribute this. And do I think they'll do it? Jim Marrs thinks this is the fail-safe position. Perhaps they'll do it. I just wanted to throw it out there so when the little gray men appear in the sky, people know it's probably not little gray men. It's the electromagnetic servants of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Now, Dave, I was going to ask you this. I'd seen this earlier on in the week, and it was on Facebook, so I don't know how real it actually was, linking back to an alternative news site, but it was talking about and showed a video of this DJ with this what was called a 4K hologram. And it looked like this bluish DNA strand that self-connected to itself, almost like an Ouroboros. And it was amazing looking. And Billy Hayes, it was actually Billy Hayes, the HAARP guy. He had posted on there talking about it with nanotechnology and whatnot being integrated into it. Are you familiar with that 4K hologram? And if so, can you expand on it a little bit?
Well, I'm not familiar with the term you're using, but if I think I understand what you're talking about, it's a holographic projection where you can make it look like a craft is flying along the sky, and it will actually, as it progresses overhead, it'll reflect sunlight in a way that would reflect the fact that it was moving through the sky, so sun would change, the shadow would change, and so forth. So, yeah, I'm familiar with that part of the technology. I was not aware, and I have not heard, that they could put someone in a room right next to you, but it makes sense that they could.
Well, there was
I understand that they've done in terms of operationalizing this out in the Nevada desert is they've landed the holographic craft, not real, of course, and they've offloaded beings, or what looks like it's a holographic projection of beings, and they have videotaped it to see how it would play on the news. Now, I have been told that by an insider. So I know that they've taken the technology that far. Now, I had a conversation one time with Carol Rosen, a phone conversation, and she used to be the secretary to Warner von Braun. And she talked about this was going to happen. In fact, I included her in the article. And she said that she and Warner von Braun both had beings appear out of nowhere in the space that they were in. I think it was probably this technology.
Well, there's some more videos. I'll have to send you the link today because it was very interesting. That one looked very good, the blue DNA, and it looked like it was part of a concert, which made me kind of think that maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just computer animation. However, not that I guess they are like computer animation, but more of a traditional, just done on the video. There was another one where it was a room, looked like a room, and it looked like National Geographic, a bunch of corporate sponsors in the background as a family. It looked like it might have been somewhere in the Middle East. And they were actually projecting these holograms of animals, dolphins swimming on the floor, Tyrannosaurus Rex walking by, rhinoceros, that looked very, very real. And the children would go interact with it. But as soon as they walked through it, you could tell that it wasn't actually there. But very convincing if it wasn't just, done in motion or a video editing program. But I'll have to send you those links because they were pretty intriguing. And I had to say it definitely was worth looking into more. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy to think that mind control program goes so far. And I mean, really, you look at the basis of our school, the whole kindergarten and that system came over from, the systems in Europe before World War I.
Well, that's coming. We're almost talking about two things, but I think it's two different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
When you're talking about these kinds of holographic projections, that's one thing. Voices are another. Let me go back to what Delgado did when he was at Yale. He began to actually do this to cats and to mice and to dogs. And then later, right before he went to work for the CIA, he was doing it wirelessly with epileptics, and he could stop seizures by changing the electromagnetic frequency of the brain. See, the brain's an electrochemical device. It's not a computer. It's more like a multi-dimensional computer than it is a three-dimensional computer, but with electromagnetics. And what Delgado figured out how to do was to induce mental states. I saw these when I first started teaching psychology back in the 80s. I used to have this 16-millimeter film that I would show students where he could make a cat turn into a raging ball of fury, or he could make the cat just be completely calm like he did the bull in the bullfight that I just mentioned. That's one aspect of this technology, is emotional manipulation through electromagnetic means. The other way is to manufacture stimuli by fooling the sensory areas of the brain. And it's both holographic, and they use some kind of derivation of stealth technology where the image can reflect back on itself so it looks like it's solid, much like a stealth bomber will do. And there's other aspects of this too. Now, the way they get the voices in your head The way Nick Begich described it to me when I interviewed him was they just tap into the audio frequency centers of Broca's area, which are the speech centers of the brain, and they just manufacture it and beam it into your brain, and you hear it. Now, again, you could do it on a narrow spectrum basis where I could just target you. If I knew your electromagnetic frequency fingerprint, everybody has a brain fingerprint that's unique to them, much like their own personal fingerprint. So I could actually dial you up like you did me before the show, and I could implant these things into your brain. Now, there is a countermeasure to this, and I'm trying to think of who told me this. It might have been Major Ed Dames, who started, one of the guys started the remote viewing program for the U.S. Army and the CIA back in the 70s. I think it was Ed that told me that the way you block this technology is to have a white noise generator. And that really disrupts these electromagnetic waves.
But what about the old standby tinfoil hat? Will that work?
Well, you know, there's something to be said for that. I actually had a graduate school professor, Dr. Bohannon, and we talked about this. And he said, isn't it interesting that across all cultures, people to stop voices will do one of two things with aluminum foil. They'll put it on hats or they'll put it over their windows. And I said, well, what do you make of that? And he said, we found people not schizophrenic that have done this. See, that used to be attributed to schizophrenics that see and hear things that aren't there. And he said, but we found it in people who are not schizophrenic. And he said, I said to him, well, Jim, what do you think it is? And he said, I think they're being beamed at. They're being experimented on. And he said, get me to say that publicly, and I'll call you a liar. But he truly believed that that was what was going on. So to counter it, people kind of intuitively get out the tinfoil. No joke.
Well, I mean, there's got to be something to it for us to be so ingrained into our lexicon, you know.
Well, they find it in Iran, they find it in Japan, they find it in New York City. So it's across all cultures. See, the tinfoil hat syndrome is kind of an American saying about conspiracy theorists. But you find the behavior, it's cross-cultural. So I think Dr. Bohannon was right on the money.
Well, Dave, I wanted to ask you one more question. You had mentioned a little bit earlier about the MK Ultra program, and I know that was one of the topics when I first started waking up that, you know, I thought, talking to some people that had said that they were involved with things like that, you know, it was a little hard for me to swallow at first. But as things progressed, as with many things, it seemed that it gained more and more credence and to the point where I believe them now. Can you talk a little bit about MK Ultra and what, you know, was really there and the effects we're still seeing of it today?
Yeah, if you could, Dave, let me follow up with that. You said your dad was involved in that, I think, just in the last answer that you gave. Talk about that a little bit. You mean your dad was involved in the program,
No.
in the scientific end of it, or?
He was aware of it.
Okay.
He was aware of the program. He was aware of the PSYOPs. He was aware of Dr. Jolly West, and I don't know if you guys know who that is. He was a psychiatrist that originally debriefed.
Him and Cameron, right? You and Cameron, right? Those two guys?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And these guys were some of the pioneers in MK Ultra. And what we know happened to MK. By the way, we're still finding out stuff about MK Ultra. It's kind of like the experiment that knows no bounds. One of the things they did was they gave soldiers LSD without their knowledge, and then they asked them to perform military maneuvers. And that goes back to what we had a plan at one time, that if we thought we were going to go to war with the Soviet Union and we had agents over there, we would try to put LSD in their water supply in key locations, not blanketly, but in key locations. But they thought they'd have a hard time getting agents because they might soon be blown up. But that was done as an experiment. The other thing with MK Ultra is they used hypnosis. They put people in sensory deprivation situations. See, if you put someone in a sensory deprivation situation where they can't see, hear, feel, or have any kind of sensation, after about 20 minutes, the mind is programmed to have images, so it will start making stuff up. And there's another aspect to our unconscious mind where we tend to want to see things that in our what we expect to see and what we want to see. So we start hallucinating things that are favorable to us. Well, they did a lot of sensory deprivation experiments in MK Ultra too, and then they found out when they pulled people out of sensory deprivation and they would immediately hypnotize them, they could turn them into Manchurian candidates. And a lot of people thought at one time, well, you had to use drugs and this and that, but no. And I'm talking about you can induce what's called post-amnesic hypnosis, or post-hypnotic amnesia, I should say. So in other words, I use sensory deprivation on you, and then I hypnotize you, and I get you to perform a task, and then I also, with a keyword, make you forget that you did this task, which would make you an ideal agent, because if you were caught and tortured, you couldn't give anything up because you wouldn't remember it. So that was one aspect of it as well, too. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, a lot of people don't know this. Did you guys know he was involved in MK Ultra?
I had actually heard that.
And I think there's a lot more to that than what we know. This brilliant man, I mean, he was a genius. I mean, when you look at his background academically, when he started college, he was exceptional. And people liked him. He wasn't some weird loner guy. He was just a normal person. I've seen interviews with his brother, and his brother said, you know, he just went, my brother went off the deep end. I don't know what happened to him. He used to be a nice guy, and he was brilliant, had a great future. And then he started blowing up people's mailboxes. So you look at this, and how many Ted Kaczynskis are there out there? Now, that kind of brings us full circle. I'll tell you who a Ted Kaczynski is, and I'll tell you who's an MK Ultra product, is, what was the guy's name? The Aurora bomber? The Batman bomber?
Yeah, I don't remember his name, but absolutely. I mean, he had his own handler who was the head of the whole program. I mean, there was some very deep questions.
James something, right? James something? James.
Yeah. You got it. You know what's interesting about that? That kid went to high school with my wife's cousin's kids, and they knew him well. Nothing wrong with the guy. Nothing. Nothing will indicate any pathology, kind of like Ted Kaczynski again. Now, here's where it gets really weird. What did Daddy do? His dad? He was involved in mind control for the military. That's something I uncovered when I wrote about the story. Yeah, let me talk about the Aurora bomber for a second. Because,
yeah, please do, because I'd like to hear that. And then there were also, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
this is kind of interesting, guys. I grew up a mile from that movie theater. My high school was 2 miles from that movie theater. I mean, I know that area like the back of my hand.
Now, I lived down the street from it and lived there for 3 years. I used to go to that movie theater. Yeah, in Aurora.
Oh, I went to Aurora.
Second and Sable.
Yeah, I lived at the 6th Avenue and Chambers area.
Okay.
And that's over on Sable and Exposition. I know it well. People listening, excuse me, from Colorado know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, you probably know then that movie theater shares a parking lot in common with the Aurora Mall, and that part of the Aurora Mall that faces east towards the movie theater, there's a police substation there, and there's been one there for over 30 years. And those cops could have been at that movie theater in under 2 or 3 minutes. No question. And they weren't. And what's really interesting about this whole case, too, is, and this is why I think this kid was MK Ultra, is here you've got a starving medical student. What was he, 24 years of age, living in a low-life apartment. I mean, I know the area of Aurora he was living in, and that's not a place you want to settle down in.
Yeah, they used to pull bodies out of the field across from my place.
Oh, yeah, it was awful. I thought, God, that's where he lives, but it wasn't that far from the old Fitzsimmons Army base where they now have the University of Colorado Medical Center, where this kid went to school, which was roughly about Peoria and Colfax. And that would have been, what would that have been? Maybe 4 or 5 miles from the movie theater. So anyway, this kid is in this apartment. He booby-trapped it, and he had about $80,000. I spec'd this out to a military guy. They talked about all the equipment he had there. like it was some horrible thing and it was going to shock the public. Didn't shock me. It made me realize it was a false flag because he had about $80,000 of military-grade hardware. Where does a starving medical student get $80,000 of medical-grade hardware? Yeah. And how to use it? How does a 24-year-old kid know how to set such sophisticated booby traps that they had to bring in the best bomb squad in the Rocky Mountain region to enter his apartment? They had a heck of a time getting into his apartment because he had it so intricately booby trapped. A 24-year-old starving medical student. Now, what's interesting about that is, being from San Diego, his dad worked up the way in Orange County, and his dad did mind control. And that is just, to me, just freaky beyond belief. And what was also interesting is they had an interview, and my niece saw it, my sister saw it, my nephew saw it. All three people saw this interview at different times, where they interviewed the cop who had this kid in his car after they actually had found him. They didn't even know that they had the guy when they first had him. He's just dressed up like Batman. They thought he was fitting into the movie. So he's sitting in the police cruiser in the back seat, and then they realized this is probably the guy, and he had no recollection of what he'd done. Nothing. This was classic Manchurian Candidate stuff.
Well, Dave, switching gears here, if you don't mind. You published another story, and you really dispelled two myths with one story. The title of the story is "A Clergy Response Team Insider Reveals the Duties of a Pastor Inside of a FEMA Camp." So the two myths that were dispelled are A, there really is clergy response teams, and B, there really are FEMA camps. Talk about that article if you can and flesh it out for us if you don't mind.
Well, I've been kind of flirting with this topic for some time. I've written about NOVAD, DHS, the clergy response teams, and I get these angry letters from pastors telling me how full of crap I am. Well, Pastor Walt Mansfield contacted me, and he says, "Dave, you're right on the money. I was one of the first pastors in the country that was recruited into the clergy response team back in 05 and 06. And he sent me a bunch of documents. Some have been made public before through Alex Jones, and the rest had not been. And he says, you're the guy I want to break this." Now, I made it a real simple story. It's a relatively short article. This guy covered a lot in just a few words. Here's what I found out. Number one, when they recruit these pastors, they make them sign a non-disclosure, non-everything agreement. And so they tell you can't talk. Number two, you're taught to tell your flock, your congregation, to follow Romans 13, which the DHS version of Romans 13 is do whatever the government tells you, no matter what it is. And that certainly isn't what the Bible teaches. And he started having a problem with the training at that point. Then the other thing that they did is he said that they talked to him about how martial law would go into effect. They said, let's just say, for example, it's a Friday afternoon and an emergency is declared. The kids are at school, dad's at work, mom's at home. He said, those families will be in different locations. And I was going, oh my goodness. It means they're going to transport them to 3 different camps. And these pastors were trained to go to these FEMA camps. And they said that these people would be traumatized because family members would be dead, or they'd be separated from their family members, and they were supposed to provide grief counseling, comfort counseling, but they were admonished from doing one thing. You guys you've read the article, but to the average person who's listening, you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you next. What DHS told these pastors is when you're giving these people counseling, you can't mention Jesus or the Bible.
Is that very telling or what?
Sure seems like a
that
conflict of interest.
Well, it's real clear.
Exactly.
They're bringing in the pastors. Well, I'll give you an example. I'll make an analogy from history. I've seen the old newsreels where the Jews who are headed for their final demise are put on the trains, and they're carrying suitcases. And the Nazis are letting them take the suitcases on board. Well, I think that was to promote a sense of normalcy, like, well, we're just going to go there for a while, but we'll be able to come back out, and it's going to be okay. And I think that the pastors are like the suitcases for the old Nazis. They represent some form of normalcy, that this is going to be okay. Hey, look, it's a pastor. You can trust a messenger from God. He serves Jesus. Except you can't mention Jesus.
Now, are these pastors, Dave, are these pastors knowing? I mean, do they think? I mean, I know you can't get inside their mind, but the one that you interviewed, was it his understanding that these guys were doing it because they thought that was like the best thing for their flock, or are they just selling out to evil? I mean, what is it?
Selling out.
Really?
Yeah, that
they knowingly are selling out to evil.
I asked Pastor Mansfield that very clear, and he didn't hesitate. He said, "Look, I know a lot of these people," and he said they're really nice guys. You sit down and eat lunch with them, you think they're a wonderful person. He said, but they truly don't have God in their heart, and they're selling out. He said it's their 30 pieces of silver.
Well, I mean, why would they? Do they give them a bunch of money? I mean, do they give them? What's the upside? I mean, do they give them thousands of dollars, tens of thousands? They guarantee that they're going to be safe. I mean, what's their motivation? Is it just good old fashioned greed?
In the 1990s, Maricopa County health officials came to my campus and looked for first responder volunteers out of the civilian population, and they said you'd get the drugs first. I volunteered for that reason. This is the same thing. These pastors are going to be immune to the roundups when they occur, and they know the roundups are coming. And if you're not a pastor that's in the clergy response team, if they have a safe zone from a disaster area, you cannot come in. You're given a badge. You're actually given a government badge if you're in this program. And if you don't have this badge, you're excommunicated from the area. And so that means you're going to be in more harm. You're going to have more harm come to you. Your family's going to be in more danger. So a lot of them are making the same deal that I did, although I didn't have to compromise my values. I thought, well, okay, I get to help people, give them drugs in the case of a bioattack, and my family gets it too. But unfortunately, in this situation, these pastors are sacrificing their integrity and really ultimately their soul and the souls of those around them. I mean, it's really clear why they want them in the FEMA camps. You don't want to have to subjugate a civilian population that's going to be unruly and fight against you. You want it to be as easy if you're the powers that be, and nothing like putting a pastor in the camp to calm people down. But you know what they told the people too? I've seen the literature on this. They gave a reason why you couldn't mention Jesus in the Bible in these FEMA camps. And what it said is, religion has been used as an instrument of oppression through the years, and we certainly don't want to facilitate that here in a future crisis. True story, guys. I got the doctor.
Well, you talk about roundups, Dave. You talk about roundups real quick, and I think Jason wants to come in. You talk about roundups. Just on that real quick note, I don't see them rounding anybody up as long as we still have our firearms. So you think there's some sort of a plan to disarm us first? Because I got to believe there's not going to be a whole lot of roundup going on with people in Montana as long as they have their 28 guns per household. You know where I'm coming from?
I'm gonna give you the scenario that I think is coming. Number one, we're going to see a reintroduction of a pathogenic virus. Could be Ebola, could be something else after the first of the year. We're going to have medical martial law. We're then going to have a false flag event or a series of false flag events designed to bring about military martial law. From that point, under military martial law, you'll scare 90% of the people into giving up their guns because the government's going to dictate it. People are going to be afraid of hauled off to camps. I mean, the stuff will be underway to some degree. There'll be public arrests. The NDAA will be used, but they won't be going house to house. But at some point, you're going to say, okay, if you have a gun, you're going to prison. And people are going to acquiesce. I mean, let's look at the facts, okay? Stanley Milgram did a compliance study. How many people would put someone to death just based on the orders of an authority figure wearing a lab coat? And he found nearly 70% of the people would do that with very little coercion. Solomon Ash found the same thing, about 65% of the people. Well, if you're under dire circumstances, not research circumstances, those numbers are going to climb exponentially. I think 90% of the people will give up their guns willingly.
That's sad. That's a sad estimate, Dave. Go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
No problem. Sorry, I just swallowed wrong. Apparently, it's just one of those days. I'll get a drink of water there. Okay, I wanted to quick jump back a little bit. We had talked about what happened in Aurora and the connection, possible connection to MK Ultra. There also, I have heard of, also a connection to the Sandy Hook shooter, and possibly being involved in a similar type of program. And he literally disappeared off the radar for, I want to say, 2 or 3 years, and then came back and supposedly was a very changed person. And of course, Sandy Hook, there's so many glaring red flag warnings that I just cannot at this point attribute it to anything but a drill that the American people have fallen for. Can you talk a little bit? Do you know about any connections with the Sandy Hook shooter and any sort of mind control programs?
I don't, but what I've seen are the same things everyone else has seen. Reports of multiple gunshots, multiple shooters, and of course that all disappears, and we've got to narrow it down to a lone nut assassin, which is always the MO. And you've got a scenario involving the perpetrator that makes no sense, totally out of character for the individual. And then what's interesting is we keep seeing the reappearance through photographic evidence of crisis actors. And I look at these and I go, oh, yeah, I've seen this guy here at the Boston Marathon. Yeah, that's right. I look at the pictures side by side, same person. So you have a victim at the Boston Marathon, you have a victim or some grieving person at Sandy Hook, and it's the same person, crisis actors. So, I'm not sure what to think about Sandy Hook. Some people think it never even happened. It was the ultimate false flag event based on nothing. I think it probably did happen, but I know it didn't happen in the way we were told. And it just really, to me, boggles my mind. It's probably the strangest event I've ever seen as far as false flags go.
Yeah, there really are so many questions there, and so many glaring examples of how it was most likely a drill. Moving on, you were talking a little bit about a possible false flag action happening after the Ebola. Now, first off, do you think this Ebola thing, we have talked on one of the past shows, and there's a possibility of the Ebola thing being a very scary situation with the numbers you were talking about, and if they were truly suppressing it to keep the economy alive over the holiday season, and that it's just been brushed under the rug, so to say, that it could really be scary when it does resurface in the middle of January. I was wondering if you could talk about that, and what are your thoughts? Do you think it's just going to be kind of something that's not all that serious? I mean, Ebola is always serious, but something they're hyping up in order to sell vaccines and push this agenda forward, or do you think it's a clear and present danger?
Well, I think there's something that's going to be there that's a clear and present danger. And I always say, look at what people do, not what they say. Bill Gates invested $560 million into something called the Global Fund, which is going to vaccinate as many people on the face of the earth as possible for TB, HIV, and Ebola. So he didn't sink that kind of money in without expecting a return on investment. That, to me, is kind of the barometer of this situation. You also look at the fact that we had a vaccine for Ebola that was created in 2006, and I exposed that on my website. It's funny, they scrambled, changed the website, but I went to the Wayback Machine where you can go pick up past articles from websites and exposed them again for covering it up. But they buried that. So you first had Monsanto experimenting with a vaccine. They gave way to GlaxoSmithKline, and now we have a whole host of people involved. And this vaccine is supposed to be ready sometime in January. Now, I used to teach, research methods, and medical research was one of the byproducts of things we looked at to learn the mechanics of good research. And I learned from medical research, you can't take something like a vaccine and bring it to market in 5 months. It's crazy because it's not safe. You haven't had proper clinical trials, and this is what they're doing. Also, I don't think we're really dealing with Ebola. And I mentioned this before when I was on your show. We know that the CDC holds the patent on Ebola. Well, you can't hold a patent on something that's naturally occurring in the environment. So that means that what we're looking at here is a pathogen has been bioengineered, weaponized, or changed in some fashion, and then you could own the patent on it legally. And the reason the CDC owns the patent is because if you contract something and I own the patent on what you've contracted and you take a treatment for it, you've interfered in my intellectual property. Therefore, you owe me, or the manufacturer of the medicine company owes me money for messing with my intellectual property. And that's where I think this is going. The CDC setting themselves up for a very big payday. And oh, by the way, don't make the mistake, and I'm saying this to the listening audience, of thinking the CDC is a government agency. They're a private corporation like the Federal Reserve, and they operate on a government charter. And so that's why they have government power. But they are not a government corporation. Neither is the FDA. Neither is the IRS. So this is where I think this is going. We're going to see something come in after the first of the year. I actually did, and I think I mentioned this on your show, I actually broke Ebola down based on research in Africa and Europe. And the Ebola cycle from the time of first contraction to the time of death is somewhere around 22 to 24 days on average. That's your median figure. And I started projecting from Thomas Duncan, patient 0 in August, and I calculated that by the time that we got to December, using the power of 2, 2, 4, 8, and so forth, that we should probably be into the hundreds of thousands of victims by now. But it's just disappeared. Now people say, oh, they're covering it up. You can't cover up something that big. The social media would be all over it. So we weren't dealing with Ebola in the way that we understood it. And the other reason I know we're not dealing with Ebola in the way we understand it is we've never seen from the Ebola victims any toxicology reports, any lab descriptions. It's all been swept under the carpet. I think it was an experiment. I think they took it away for a while so we'd have a normal Christmas season and people wouldn't be afraid to go out in crowds. But I do think in January or February we're going to see the reintroduction of another agent. And this is where things, I think, will get interesting.
Well, Dave, we got only a couple minutes left here before we go, and I want to give you a chance to give out your websites and where people can go see your fine work. But before you do, we've been asking every guest so far, and now it's just your turn. Do you have any Christmas memories here that you care to share? Anything that you do as far as a routine or a tradition over the holidays here that you care to share with the listeners?
Well, something just very personal to my family. Something I miss my parents dearly, especially this time of year. I was blessed to have two wonderful parents, and I try to provide my family with some of those wonderful traditions I grew up with. And one of them is just the hot chocolate and sugar cookies and opening a present up at Christmas Eve. And it's more about the fellowship than anything else. So it's something that we carry over in the Hodges household. And it's something that we really enjoy and something that we always will continue to do. And it's just a wonderful time of year.
Sounds like you dropped your mic there, Dave. Go ahead and give us your website and Facebook page, YouTube, anything like that before we go. We only got a minute.
People can tune in and listen to you.
Facebook is Dave Hodges, and you can link into the Common Sense Show page. The website, well-traveled, lots of good stuff up there, I think. It's thecommonsenseshow.com, and I've got several different articles up there a day. And I'd say come up, get educated, leave your comments, and let's fight the good fight.
Well put, Dave. Thanks so much, really, for joining us here. You're always a great interview, and I know we talked before, but I think we'd like to have you back here somewhat regularly to do updates because, man, a lot of the information you have is so cutting edge and so timely. But we just appreciate the work that you do, and I know I can speak for Jason when I say we just thank you so much for joining us on our holiday week broadcast.
Hey, my pleasure to be with you guys, and let's talk about doing something.
All right. Well, thanks again, Dave. Happy holidays. I hope you and your family have a blessed time of the season.
Thank you. Same to you guys, too.
All right. Merry Christmas.
All right, guys. Well, that's been the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. We'll be back.